What's going on, everyone? Welcome to this episode of Home Built Workshop. I hope all of you are doing awesome. Yes, it's a little different angle. And yes, I'm kneeling on the floor so that I can show you this particular area. This little area behind my drill press, this little shelf here, just a little piece of MDF, nothing really fancy. It's really handy, sort of, for storing small things. But what happens a lot is that I end up knocking things off of there and it collects really bad with sawdust and shavings and things left over from the drill press. And really, I'm kind of tired of it. My goal for this project is to finally address this area, get things a little more organized. I want to build some sort of a small, shallow cabinet that's still tall enough to hold things like cans of spray. And I want to have some little sliding acrylic doors on there, just something that has maybe a little thumb hole that you can slide open and just put some things in there. And then I would still have the top available to store things that I'll eventually knock on the floor. I think overall it's going to make a big difference in this area, kind of neaten it up and keep some of these things from tumbling off the shelf and getting buried behind the drill press. Sound like a good plan? I think it's going to be worth the time to do, so let's get started. Now, to build this little storage shelf unit, I didn't want to have to go out and buy materials. This is not going to be anything super fancy. It's just a shop cabinet. I mean, I still want it to look nice, but I didn't want to have to go out and buy a bunch of extra material. So I got a bunch of elm still on hand from some logs that I milled up with a chainsaw mill. I think these are going to work perfect. A little bit shorter pieces. They still have the live edge on there. We'll be able to rip that off. Cut these down to size. It's just over 3/4 of an inch, so at some point we're going to have to send these to the drum sander to bring it down to 3/4. I think it's going to work perfect. First thing we need to do is get rid of this live edge and establish a square edge on one side. I've found in my workflow that getting a straight edge on these smaller live edge pieces is really pretty simple. I just trace out a straight line with a straight edge. Then I roughly cut it on the bandsaw as close as I can to that line. From there, a couple passes on the jointer gives me one nice flattened square edge. From there, I can head back to the table saw where I can rip these down to their final width. And apparently the battery had died at this point on my microphone, and I didn't realize it, but you all know what a table saw sounds like. Just imagine that. Apparently right here at this point, I realized I didn't have my push blocks handy, and I had to mess around and try to reach them. Make sure you got them handy before you start your cuts. Now that I have all my pieces cut down to size, I guess now is a good time to run these back through the drum sander to finish bringing them down to 3/4 of an inch thick. I guess technically, since we're building this to fit a specific location, the thickness really doesn't make any difference. But I like to try to keep things a little bit uniform, and that's why I'm running them through the sander now. With my pieces now all at the same thickness, now I need to start to think about how I want to assemble this thing. I don't want to just do a regular old butt joint because, well, this is going to be hanging on the wall and I want a joint that's at least a little bit more secure. What I want to do is cut a rabbet on the ends here so that the side piece can sit down in and just give me a little bit more gluing surface and overall just a little bit stronger construction once this is hanging on the wall and loaded up with, I don't know, whatever we're going to load this up with. I'm going to use my crosscut sled and the table saw along with a stop block, and we'll just nibble away that material to create that rabbet. After slicing away that material, we're left with a few small ridges that I'll quickly clean up with a sharp chisel and a small sanding block. I'm just double checking the fit before I move on to the next step. And that next step is going to be to figure out how I'm going to install some little doors, I guess. What I want to have on the front of this is kind of some sliding panels. I'm going to use acrylic. I've seen things like this made where they're like little glass panels or something like that, but I've got some acrylic on hand and I think that's going to work really well. This is a long, kind of skinny rectangle, so the doors are sort of going to be the same thing, but instead of opening like regular doors, I want them to slide. Some of you may remember something similar to maybe your grandfather's gun cabinet that used to be on the wall way back in the day. Had a little sliding door on the front. I can't be the only one that's remembering that sort of thing, but I want to do something similar to where there's a acrylic panel that slides open, and in order for it to slide open, we got to have some sort of a channel or some sort of a track for that acrylic to fit into. If you saw the video I recently posted about making a whole bunch of walnut award plaques, you'll know that I've got a new 3D printer to play with. And it wasn't up until now that I actually had a chance to start playing with this thing. I've had it for about a month before this, but it was just running nonstop, making pieces for that last project. Since I've had a little bit of time to play around, I've designed some little 3D printed tracks that fit the acrylic that I'm going to use for these doors. I printed up a bunch of pieces of these. These are in sections about 9 inches long. I'm going to be able to install these in a little groove in the wood, and then the acrylic can fit right in there. It'll keep everything in place. I think it's going to work really good. I'm going to put this channel pretty close to the front edge, maybe about 3/16 in. Might even be able to go 1/8, but I don't want to get too thin on that front. It's like about 3/16. I think that's going to work really well. Now we'll just nudge the fence over a little and keep making passes until our groove is wide enough to fit this little track in. And again, we're left with a few ridges in this groove from the table saw blade that I'll quickly remove with a little sanding block. I think now we're ready to add some glue to these joints, clamp this thing up. As you're watching me apply glue to these pieces, how many of you actually picked up on the mistake that I'm making right now? If you picked up on it, pause the video, go down below, leave a comment, and let me know what it is. I'm going to figure it out here in just a minute, but I want to see if you caught it. I was just about to check for square, and I realized I goofed. I can't glue this up yet because I don't have the plexiglass in there. But I can't glue that end on. I'll just clean up the glue on this end. I'm glad you guys caught that and reminded me before I glued the whole thing up. I do need the tracks in there because I have to put the acrylic in there. All right, I'll scoot this out of the way. Then I'll rip down a couple pieces of acrylic, and I think we'll be back on track. Glue this end. It'll be like nothing ever happened. Whew, crisis averted. Ugh, acrylic smells so bad. Before I slip these into place, I'll just drill a couple of small holes for some knobs that I'll install later. Now I can install the little tracks. I've got screw holes modeled into this, but I think I'm just going to hold it in place with a few drops of CA glue. Slide this first panel in place. Drop in the rest of these little tracks. And now I can glue on the other piece. Can't believe I did that. You gotta really make sure you pay attention to order of operations. This was almost really bad. If I'd have glued this together before any of this was installed, I have no way to get this acrylic panel in there. Especially with stuff like this. If you're gonna capture a piece, make sure you think through that process. I almost made a big mistake and got to share it with you guys. To route the recess for the back, I'm gonna use my router with an edge guide. I've just got a straight cutting bit in there. We're just gonna run it around and cut a little recess on this inside edge that'll accept the back. I gathered up a bunch of offcuts of the same elm and I cut them into small strips that I can use to create the back panel. And once I had all the back panel pieces cut to length, I decided to put a small chamfer on the edge that you're going to see from the inside. And once all these pieces are glued side by side, this is going to kind of make it look like a paneling. Now I'll just use a chisel, square up the corners. Since we used a router bit, and of course those are round, we got rounded corners. We need mostly square corners anyway. Chisel makes quick work of squaring them up. Before I glue these in, I'm using this little squeezy clamp to kind of spread these two pieces apart. There's a bit of a bow in these boards. The ends are right where they need to be because they're held in place by the end pieces, but it does bow in a little bit. So I'm just kind of opening that up just so everything's nice and smooth. And then we'll just start installing our back panels. I am going to use just a little bit of glue. I'm not gluing it all the way across because I do want to allow for this to do a little bit of expanding and contracting. I don't think it's going to move much, but I want to try to account for some of that. These last couple pieces I had to adjust the width just a little bit. So now they should hopefully just pop into place. Come on, you can pop. Pop into place. Ah. Once all the back panel pieces have dried, I'll again use my chamfer bit and put a small chamfer around the front edge. This is just to sort of soften the corners, but really because I just like the look of a chamfer. I think it'll look pretty neat along the front. With all the sanding completed, I got the edges rounded over just to break those corners. Everything feels nice and smooth. It's time to apply a finish. I'm gonna go with my favorite tried and true shop project finish, good old boiled linseed oil. Super easy to apply, and for shop projects, I think it's a perfect finish. You don't have to spend a whole lot of time trying to get a nice, perfect finish, unless of course you want to. Boiled linseed oil, we just wipe it on, let it dry, and we're pretty much done. And it always smells like peanuts or something. called the splash and wipe method. Splash it on, wipe it around. That's my own patented method. It looks nice. I like it. This is going to work so much better. I can't wait to get this installed. Get rid of that MDF shelf. I 3D printed a couple of knobs that I'll use to install on the acrylic doors. To secure them, I'm using some more of those heat set inserts. Remember I mentioned in the last video that I had a few more ideas to use these heat set inserts? This is one of them. They work awesome. And there's our custom designed 3D printed knobs. Got the Homebuilt Workshop initials printed in red on the front. It's time to install them. The little storage cabinet is installed. Looks so much nicer than that crusty MDF shelf. Be able to store some different things in here, maybe drill bits, who knows what. And I'm sure, even though I don't like to, I'm sure the top will become a storage shelf as well. If nothing else, it's just a place to collect dust. But this looks super good. I'm really glad to have this done. It's going to organize this area just a little bit better. I know it's in a bit of an awkward space, especially to try to show you on camera, but for me and my little shop, this is a perfect spot. I use this area all the time when I'm at the drill press, and by being able to store certain things in this area, it's going to be awesome. Really glad to have this done. One step towards becoming a little bit more organized. What sort of organizational projects do you need to tackle around your shop? Let me know down in the comments. Hope you have an awesome day. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you next time. I gotta go get this thing loaded up. Super cool. Ow! My knees.